Okay, this is a discussion about Ralph Waldo Emerson's essay Eloquence. And I gotta tell you, man, I just think Emerson is so fantastic. He is a 19th century American scholar and author. And I mean, I could go on and on about him, but you should kind of go Wikipedia a lot of these people I talk about and see what this guy's about. And the essay's called Eloquence. And really, what eloquence means is speaking well, right? In a nutshell, if you were to look it up, it means skilled speech. So this is what Emerson says. He says, of all the musical instruments on which men play, a popular assembly is that which has the largest compass and variety, and out of which by genius and study the most wonderful effects can be drawn. And so what he's saying is that, the audience becomes a kind of musical instrument for a very skilled speaker. And, it's kind of hard for us to think about uh, being in an audience of a super skilled speaker, because most of our great skilled speakers we interact with uh, via mass media technology, right? Although occasionally you'll come across a great speaker, maybe a preacher in church, or maybe a teacher, something like that. Maybe you'll pay money and go to a comedy club or something and see somebody who's really, really, you know, somebody who's really brilliant. At the bigger universities, often they will pay a lot of money for good speakers. So, Plato's definition of rhetoric is the art of ruling the minds of men. Right? Think about that. Plato's definition of rhetoric or persuasion is the art of ruling the minds of men, suggesting when you invoke this concept of art and involve skill and practice and beauty, and indeed, I think we can think about speech or rhetoric as a kind of art, as Aristotle did. The end or the purpose, right? Not like the end of the line, but the purpose of eloquence or good speaking is it not, to alter in a pair of hours, perhaps in a half hour's discourse, the convictions and habits of years. And so here's this notion of persuasion, right? That there is a fundamental change in how we look at the world. That's what persuasion is. It has to do with a kind of change in attitude, belief, action, and some people who are very skilled can show us the truth and we alter our behavior. All right, I'll continue. And I should say, if it's in red, it's very important, and it's going to be a test question. So pay more attention to this stuff in red. Uh, Him we call an artist who shall play on an assembly of men as a master on the keys of the piano, who seeing the people furious shall soften and compose them, shall draw them when he will to laughter and to tears. This is a power of many degrees and requiring in the orator or the speaker a great range of faculty. Faculty really has to do with skill and ability and experience, requiring a composite or a solid or a complete man, such as nature rarely organizes, so that in our experience we are forced to gather up the figure in fragments, here one talent and there another. And so, I mean, what he's kind of saying in this quote, I think, is it's pretty rare to have a great speaker. If a speaker utter a noble sentiment, the attention deepens. A new and highest audience now listens, and the audiences of the fun and of facts and of the understanding are all silenced and awed. There is something excellent in every audience, the capacity of virtue. They are ready to be beatified, right? To be made beautiful. They know so much more than the orator and are so just, right? They know more than the speaker, and they have this kind of ethical justice about them. They know what's right. There is a tablet there for every line he can inscribe, though he should mount to the highest levels. Humble persons are conscious of new illumination. Narrow brows expand with enlarged affections. Delicate spirits, long unknown to themselves, masked and muffled in coarsest or roughest fortunes, who now hear their own native language for the first time and leap to hear it. All right, think about this. Perhaps it's the lowest of the qualities of an orator, but it is on so many occasions of chief importance, a certain robust and radiant physical health, or shall I say, great volumes of animal heat, right? When each auditor feels himself to make too large a part of the assembly, right? When each kind of participant or speaker feels himself to make too large a part of the assembly and shudders with cold at the thinness of the morning audience, and with fear lest all will heavily fail through one bad speech, mere energy and mellowness are then inestimable. And so this is really interesting. I mean, this notion that there's something about like courage and health. So he's talking about a kind of robust physical and radiant health, right? That, if we're, if we have like the moxie and the courage, we can face the music. We face the audience. I mean, just like you, I get nervous. I always have. Um, but there's something in your belly that allows you to kind of qualm the butterflies, right? To kind of kill the fear and just go do it. He continues, Emerson says, I do not rate this animal eloquence very highly, and yet, as we must be fed and warmed before we can do any work well, even the best, so is the semi-animal exuberance, like a good stove, of the first necessity in a cold house. And I mean, I think this semi-animal exuberance, that means it's kind of like this animal energy that we have, he's just talking about something he's comparing the human, this robust physical health, and this kind of, the energy's like a good fire from a stove. All right, how about this? But eloquence must be attractive, or it is none. The virtue of books is to be readable, and of orators or speakers to be interesting, right? And so, right, this idea of eloquence or good speaking has to have a magnetic attraction, and the audience has to want to move toward, at least on an intellectual plane or psychological level, what the speaker is saying. And then the second quote in red here, the virtue of books is to be readable and of orators to be interesting. Well, that, my friends, is a lot easier said than done, right? The opposite of being interesting, I guess, is being boring. And I mean, there's a lot of competition. And when you think of interest and that which is interesting, it kind of you have to invoke the concept of focus and attention. And how do we acquire someone's attention? That's what it means to be interesting. Leaving behind us these pretensions, or being fake, better or worse, to come a little nearer to the verity or the truth. So when we leave, when we're not pretending and we're heading toward the truth, eloquence is attractive as an example of the magic of personal ascendancy, right? Personal power, a total and resultant power, rare because it requires a rich coincidence of powers in the person: intellect, will, sympathy, organs, and overall good fortune in the cause. What we really wish for is a mind equal to any exigency, right? Well, an exigency is a kind of need. It's kind of like an answer to a problem and what to do. That's what an exigency is. And so when Emerson says what we really wish for is a mind equal to any exigency, we want somebody who's kind of smart and tough and kind and can handle any situation. A man this is who cannot be disconcerted, right? Can't be like frustrated or made to be upset. And so he can never play his last card, but has a reserve of power when he has hit the mark. With a serene face, he subverts a kingdom. What is told of him is miraculous. It affects men so. The confidence of men in him is lavish or very rich, and he changes the face of the world. And history's poems and new philosophies arise to account for him, a supreme commander over all his passions and affections. But the secret of his ruling is higher than that. It is the power of nature running without impediment from the brain and will into the hands. And so this, I mean, these would be like the truly great historic persuaders, the really eloquent speakers. And their ideas are so artful that what they said is still around. And so you could think of people like you know, Jesus Christ, uh, Martin Luther King Jr. And I don't really put those two on the same plane, but it I think Martin Luther King Jr. really borrowed so heavily from the Testament and the Gospels, and the kind of people we have schools named after and religions founded upon. These are the great kind of uh, world transformers that Emerson's talking about. It is easy to illustrate this overpowering personality by these examples of soldiers and kings, but there are men of the most peaceful way of life and peaceful principle who are felt wherever they go, as sensibly as a July sun or a December frost. Men who, if they speak, are heard, though they speak in a whisper, who, when they act, act effectually, and what they do is imitated, and these examples may be found on very humble platforms as well as on high ones. And so what he's saying here is, you don't have to be super famous or anything to be an eloquent speaker, and you can find eloquence everywhere. But does anyone suppose himself to be quite impregnable? Does he think that not possibly a man may come to him who shall persuade him out of his most settled determination? I mean, here's this kind of super, super persuasion here. Your kind of most foundational aspects of who you are. I mean, is there somebody who could kind of question them? I think we don't like to think that our beliefs would be questionable. But what Emerson is saying is when someone shows up with the truth, you change. You recognize the truth, and the truth doesn't change, it changes you. All right, thus it is not of powers of speech that we primarily consider under this word eloquence, but the power that, being present, gives them their perfection, being absent, leaves them a merely superficial value. Eloquence is the appropriate organ of the highest personal energy. Personal ascendancy, or the rising up, may exist with or without adequate talent for its expression. It is as surely felt as a mountain or a planet, but when it is weaponed with a power of speech, it seems first to become truly human, works actively in all directions, and supplies the imagination with fine materials. The balance between the orator and the audience is expressed in what is called the pertinence or the relevance, right? The pertinence or the relevance of the speaker. There's always a rivalry or a battle between the orator and the occasion, between the demands of the hour and the prepossession of the individual. And so we're always in a battle for our attention, right? We're all like, our attention is always being pulled this way and that. And it's hard to listen. And the better the speaker is, the more likely, the more eloquent the speaker is, the more likely she is of being relevant. All right, I have heard it reported of an eloquent preacher whose voice is not yet forgotten in the city, that on occasions of death or tragic disaster, which overspread the congregation with gloom, he ascended the pit with more than his usual alacrity or happiness, and turning his favorite lessons of devout and jubilant thankfulness, let us praise the Lord, carried audience, mourners, and mourning along with him, and swept away all the impertinence of private sorrow, right? All the irrelevance and rudeness of private sorrow, with his hosannas and songs of praise. This rivalry between orator and the occasion is inevitable, and the occasion always yields to the eminence or the hierarchy or the supremacy of the speaker. For a great man or woman, I don't, Emerson wrote in the masculine, but I mean both genders, and he did too. For a great man is the greatest of occasions. Right? I'm going to read that quote again. This rivalry between orator and the occasion is inevitable, and the occasion always yields to the eminence of the speaker, for a great man is the greatest of occasions. next to the knowledge of the fact and law as method, which constitutes the genius and efficiency of all remarkable men. So, what he's saying here is there's an appropriate way, a kind of structure to deliver the best form, and that's what we would call method. All right, imagery. The orator must be, to a certain extent, a poet. We are such imaginative creatures that nothing so works on the human mind, barbarous or civil, as a trope, right? So, what he's saying is here, what your English teacher said about poetry, like rhyme and rhythm and the kind of particular choices of the language and the use of things like simile and metaphor and that has to do with the skill of the orator, the speaker. So like a trope is a rhetorical form. I could say, I love her like the passion of 10,000 suns. That is a trope, right? That's, I think, because I used like, it's a simile, and it brings life, it breathes life into language, and makes it something other than merely descriptive but poetic. All right. Emerson continues. He says, condense some daily experience into a glowing symbol, and an audience is electrified. They feel as if they already possess some new right and power over a fact which they can detach and so completely master in thought. It is a wonderful aid to memory, which carries away the image and never loses it. Right, like a slogan or an ad campaign or something like that. Right, put the argument into a concrete shape, into an image, some hard phrase, round and solid as a ball, which they can see and handle and carry home with them, and the cause is half won. Right? Here, let me give you here's like one of my favorite poetic phrases. Uh, and see if you can kind of unpack what it means. Suffer not our eyes to hunger for your face. Right? Suffer not our eyes to hunger for your face. Well, what that means, right, is somebody is leaving for a long time, and you're going to miss that person, and you know, the eyes in a way, they don't hunger, they don't have stomachs, and really, I mean, they don't suffer in that sense. The emotions suffer and we feel sad, but we can still say, suffer not our eyes to hunger for your face. And if we come to the heart of the mystery, perhaps we should say that the truly eloquent man is a sane man with the power to communicate his sanity. Well, sane comes from the Latin sanus, like, sanus, and it means health. And so when he says the eloquent man is sane, he means that the person, he or she, is healthy and can spread that good health. And particularly we think of sanity as health of mind. I think it's health of body too, but what he's saying, the eloquent person is healthy in both body and mind. All right, for the triumphs of the art, somewhat more must still be required, namely a reinforcing of man from events, so as to give the double force of reason and destiny. In transcendent eloquence, there was ever some crisis in affairs, such as could deeply engage the man to the cause he pleads, and draw all this wide power to a point. For the explosions and eruptions, there must be accumulations of heat somewhere, beds of ignited anthracite at the center, and in cases where profound conviction has been wrought, the eloquent man is he who is no beautiful speaker, but who is inwardly drunk with a certain belief. It agitates and tears him, and perhaps almost bereaves him of the power of articulation. Then it rushes from him, as in short, abrupt screams in torrents of meaning. And he says a lot in this quote, and I don't want to take too long unpacking it because things are getting pretty long here. But that not only is the person skilled in speaking, but he's got something really critical, like a deep moral issue that he has to talk about, and that's why this eruption, that like I mean, Martin Luther King Jr. I mean, he's one of my favorite historical figures. I mean, his life was given up to the civil rights movement, and he gave these incredible speeches about equality. I mean, what? if what would Martin Luther King have spoken about if there was a kind of social equality at the time? Would he have been driven to, would he have turned that passion into, say, the environment or poverty or, gay rights? Or, like, his destiny emerged out of that particular time, which was the unfair treatment. I mean, now I guess with Black Lives Matter, you had something else to talk about, but this idea of skill plus destiny, right? Plus the affairs of the day. One's ability to confront whatever's going on in one's near environment. Okay, eloquence must be grounded on the plainest narrative. Afterwards, it may warm itself until it exhales symbols of every kind and color, speaks only through the most poetic forms. But first and last, it must still be at bottom a biblical statement of fact. The orator is thereby an orator that he keeps his feet forever on fact, thus only is he invincible. Emerson says, if you would lift me, you must be on higher ground. If you would liberate me, you must be free. If you would correct my false view of facts, hold up to me the same facts in the true order of thought, and I cannot go back from the new conviction or belief. But the conditions for eloquence always exist. It is always dying out of famous places and appearing in corners. Wherever the polarities or oppositions meet, wherever the fresh moral sentiment, the instinct of freedom and duty come in direct opposition to fossil conservatism and the thirst of gain, the spark will pass. Yet if the pupil or the student be of a texture to bear it, the best university that can be recommended to a man of ideas is the gauntlet of the mob. He who will train himself to mastery in the science of persuasion must lay the emphasis of education not on popular arts, but on character and insight. So this idea of ethos, right? Let him see that his speech is not different from action, that when he has spoken, he has not done nothing nor done wrong, but has cleared his own skirts, has engaged himself to wholesome exertion. Let him look on opposition as opportunity. He cannot be defeated or put down. There's a principle of resurrection in him, an immortality of purpose. Men are averse and hostile to give value to their suffrages. It is not the people that are in fault for not being convinced, but he that cannot convince them. He should mold them, armed as he is with the reason and love, which are also the core of their nature. He is not to neutralize their opposition, but he is to convert them into fiery apostles and publishers of the same wisdom. The highest platform of eloquence is the moral sentiment. It is what is called affirmative truth, and has the property of invigorating the hearer, and it conveys a hint of our eternity when he feels himself addressed on grounds which will remain when everything else is taken, and which have no trace of time or place or party. Yeah, so this idea of the moral sentiment is super interesting, doing right. We like it when the hero does, knows what to do and does the right thing. Emerson continues, he says, it is only to these simple strokes that the highest power belongs. When a weak human hand touches point by point the eternal beams and rafters on which the whole structure of nature and society is laid. In this tossing sea of delusion we feel with our feet the adamant, right, or the firm. In this dominion of chance we find a principle of permanence. For I do not accept that definition of Socrates, that the office of his art is to make the great small and the small great, but I esteem this to be its perfection, when the orator sees through all the masks to the eternal scale of truth, in such sort that he can hold up before the eyes of men the fact of today steadily to that standard, thereby making the great great and the small small, which is the true way to astonish and to reform mankind. Oh yeah, that's so good. I mean, it really is beautiful. This idea that, you know, because like Aristotle says, people can be real sleazy with persuasion. They can get you to buy a used car with a bad engine. They can just upright lie. They can lead a people into war. They can rip the dignity away with simple words. But that's only if you try to make the small great and the great small. I mean, if you, by your speech, say the truth, according to Emerson, which is making the great great and the small small, that's how you can astonish and reform. And that's really what persuasion is. Eloquence, like every other art, rests on laws the most exact and determinate. It is the best speech of the best soul. It may well stand as the exponent of all that is grand and immortal in the mind. If it do not so become an instrument, but aspires to be somewhat of itself, right, to be fake, and to glitter for show, it is false and weak.